Good afternoon. It's 2 o'clock, so I'd like to go ahead and call this board meeting to order. We'll start with introductions of our people who are sitting at the table. I'm going to start from my right, which is probably your left. Chuck Gill, Secretary. Joe Ryman, Senior VP, Joyce Howard, Treasurer, myself, Therese Butler, President, Mark Eckert, Director, Don Grimm, Director, and our recording Secretary, Diane Flores. And zooming in from Hilton Head is Dan Liniger, our Vice President.
Thank you.
You're welcome. First item of business is to approve the minutes of the April 6th board working meeting. May I have a motion?
So moved.
You seconded, Dan. You didn't hear, but Joyce so moved, so Dan seconded. Any comments? Okay. Any comments from the floor? There being no comments, I'd like to see a show of hands for approving those minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Dan, are you in favor?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Motion is passed. Under new business, the purpose of today's board working meeting is that, as you're all aware if you're sitting here today, we have a project in the works for budget year 2023, and it's for the renovation of the MountainView golf course. The course is over 25 years old, has some very old components in it, and we need to get some work done. So where we are right now is that our architect, our golf course architect, and our irrigation architect have worked together. A bid package went out a couple months ago. And they will go over the results of those bids. For the bids that we have, the quotes are reflective until the end of this month. So the board is taking time today to better grasp, understand, and look at the financial ramifications of moving forward with this. It's an opportunity for us to be able to pose more questions at our consultants who are here, as well as Paul, and garner the information we need and figure out what additional information we need before our next standard board meeting or regular board meeting, which is scheduled for next Wednesday, the 18th. Be that as it may, the way that these types of meetings work is that if a motion were to come to the floor and seconded, then we would be opening it up for anybody to be able to question or ask comments. If there are no motions on the floor, then once our meeting adjourns, then we will take questions from the floor at that time. That being said, I'm going to turn it over to Joyce, who in turn will turn it over to.
Okay, thank you, Therese. Today we have Mike Gogol and Marvin Mills and Paul Halleck here to discuss the actual golf course revitalization project. And I would ask that they make sure that they speak into the mics as we're going so that it will be recorded. If we don't speak into the mics, it doesn't necessarily get picked up, and also Dan won't be able to hear us, and we certainly want Dan to hear us. So with that, I'll turn it over to, who's going first? Mike?
Okay, what we're going to do for purposes of keeping this moving is we're going to ask the board, while their presentation is going, if you'd let them get through their presentation but start taking questions or notes, and then when their presentation is done, then we'll start asking questions. Okay, thank you. Also in the audience, there are a couple of our mics that work on the loop system, which is in here. If you are having problems hearing, this mic is on the loop, and the mic that we have for questions will be on the loop. So if you are, once we switch over to a different microphone, if you cannot hear clearly, please just raise your hand and I'll ensure that this mic goes over there. Thanks.
Well, thanks a lot, Board of Directors. I appreciate the opportunity. And the Mountain View residents and SaddleBrooke residents, same thing. Appreciate the opportunity to come in and be your golf course designer, look at both this golf course, Mountain View, and the preserve. It was really an honor to work with you all and the staff and team here at Mountain View and the Board of Directors and the golf committee. So to that end, I was asked, let's just kind of go through this real quickly. How did we get to where we are today? And so to that end, in the golf industry, we use a life cycle sheet similar to this or this sheet. This has been put together by the allied associations in the golf industry, which you see at the bottom of the screen. A few of those are the Golf Course Superintendents Association of America, the National Golf Course Owners Association, United States Golf Association, the PGA of America, the Club Managers Association of America, and the American Society of Golf Course Architects, which I'm a member of. What they did was they basically looked at and polled numerous courses all over the country, different parts of the country, to get an idea of how long certain items of the golf courses last, such as irrigation systems, drainage systems, cart paths, turf grasses, greens, bunkers. How long do these things last? To get an idea, so that clubs can then, plan for and look at when certain systems will need to be replaced, such as the irrigation systems, bunkers, drainage, and things like that. So the biggest ones, obviously, we looked at for Mountain View, the irrigation system. And this is, let's keep in mind, this is an average based on courses, again, all over the country. So that also takes into account maybe courses in upper Northeast, Midwest, Colorado, locales where the systems are actually shut down and are used 4 months a year. But they're also comparing them to systems like here in Arizona, where we use them 365 days a year. So they're a little bit skewed, but again, they try to come up with the best averages. But the irrigation system, if you can't read that, the control systems are 10 to 15 years. PVC pipe under pressure is 10 to 30 years. HDPE is 40 to 60 years. And it could actually be beyond that. HDPE is fairly new in the world of golf industry. And we haven't gotten the courses that have a system that's 80 years old or 60 years old yet. So we still have a little ways to go. Tees, 15 to 20 years. Corrugated metal pipes, 15 to 30. So practice tees, 5 to 10 years. So you can kind of get an idea that when you look at Mountain View and you compare it with the list, you can see where Mountain View is either at or well beyond a time to start looking at replacements and things like that. So to that end, we would go through, and our first steps is to actually create a property map that shows topography, all the features, tree cover, the size of bunkers, greens, cart path locations, tees, so on and so forth. We then go out and actually look at things physically. So the drainage of the systems, the bunkers and conditioning, irrigation systems and landscape. One challenge, if you remember, we had this little thing last couple of years called the pandemic. We had to do this during that. So it made it a little bit more challenging than normal. We weren't able to interact as much as we really would have liked to face-to-face with everybody. We were able to do it via Zoom, but as we all know, we've all been on Zoom meetings and calls. It's never the same as being in person. We were able to get through it though, and come up with something really, we feel pretty solid about the improvements that could be made at Mountain View. In addition to that, we developed a photo archive of all the existing conditions, and that was used more as a record for us, but it also goes into additional steps in the master plan. Those being developing the base map and the concepts. And then, as you can see here, this is a On the left is holes number 1 and 2 here at Mountain View. On the right is hole number 8. So that's the concepts that we would come up with on our visits and in conversations with the staff, with Paul, really identifying areas where his maintenance needs to be, I should say not his maintenance. His maintenance practices are very good, but where we can help make the maintenance more efficient. Reducing turf is a huge one. The state of Arizona is going to be coming through the next, well, they started the last 2 years. They're coming through. January 1 is going to be the first change. And then May of 25 will be the next major change, where they're going to only allow a certain amount of water to be sent to all the golf courses, which precipitates the reduction in turf grasses. So it's a benefit for the environment. It also, done right, can work well within the maintenance and the playability of the golf courses. So we looked at that significantly, following all that up with Photoshop renderings, so we can kind of get an idea of before and afters. I'll show you a couple of those here in a little bit. And once we're all said and done, we did a color rendering overlaid over the property, so we can see and identify all the areas we'd be working in. Beyond that, we blew each one of those up into individual holes, so you get an idea of just looking at just one hole or just what we're doing on that particular hole. The areas that you see highlighted or anywhere that there's color, that's areas that we would be doing work. So you can see we're not completely rebuilding the facility. We're not completely rebuilding greens. We are looking at all the tees, all the bunkers, the irrigation system, tree cover, and obviously, as I mentioned before, turf grass reduction. The Photoshops, and the reason for the photo archive, this is an example of hole number 2. And for those that, if you can remember back to basically 2 years ago, standing at 200 yards out, this is what you could see of your second green, which was nothing. You now know, from looking out on the golf courses, you can see the golf hole. So we use this Photoshop imaging to get an idea of what the golf hole could look like. Paul has since gone in and has removed a lot of the vegetation that was blocking the views down that golf hole. One other example, here's your 8th hole of part 3. That's before, and this is what we're proposing for the work in 23. From all of this and all the consultation going through with the Greens committees and the boards, Paul and the rest of the staff, we then pared some things down, we took some things out, we added some things in, and once we get to a final product, this is the scope of work we want to look at if we're doing a construction project. So we take the concepts, we put them into AutoCAD, and we develop takeoffs for all the areas that we're going to be working in. How much turf reduction, again, bunker sizes, the amount of irrigation, those things. We then share that with Marvin Mills, our irrigation designer, and Marvin develops the irrigation plan based on the sizes and locations of the bunkers, the sizes and locations of tees, where the turf will and will not be in the future to accommodate turf reduction. We compile all that into a budget form, and it gets put into a narrative book, which the board has and the golf club staff has. We include with that costs of what items would cost based on current numbers. Obviously, we can only forecast so much. And as we all know, those numbers seem to change overnight. And then once complete, we give that book to the staff and to the club, which is your final master plan booklet. From there, we get into once approved and we understand the scope of work, we then go in and develop the construction documents and construction phase. And those documents include areas of disturbance plans, grading plans, drainage plans, grassing plans, size and scales of bunkers, tees, detailed specifications, Marvin's irrigation plans, his detailed specifications. It's a pretty thick, very comprehensive product when we're all said and done. We then interviewed and sent out invitations to 6 golf course construction companies, all based here in Arizona. All of them have done significant amount of work in and around Arizona and elsewhere. They have a unit cost bid form that they put together, that we put together for them to bid. We then broke that down into, well, I might be a step ahead, but we broke those down into 9-hole increments and 18-hole increments. We held a pre-bid conference on site with the prospective client or prospective contractors, looking at and answering any of their questions that they may have. They then went off, had about a month to put together their bids. As I mentioned, it's in a unit cost bid form. That allows us to then get more detail for the board of directors and for the financial staff to be able to forecast the project as far as from a financial standpoint. From there, we are now into the project integration phase. Once the project is approved, we will go through and work with our contractor to develop the design that we've come up with, making sure that it all meets the specifications that are in the booklets. The costs are all kept in check. I am on site at least 2 days a week during construction. Marvin Mills will be down on site as available for, once holes are built. Once all the tees are built, the bunkers have been moved, the turf has been rototilled out for the areas that we disturbed. Marvin and his staff comes in and will be staking out via GPS sub-centimeter technology, so survey grade technology to get our irrigation system, the heads exactly where they need to be the most efficient that they can be. So a couple of the questions that we were asked as far as project integration. What if we decided to eliminate elements of the project at this stage? For example, removing tees to save money, or maybe we don't do the turf reduction. Well, in doing that at this stage, we now need to go back to the drawing board, myself and Marvin, come up with a new design for the tee sizes, shapes, and locations. Marvin now needs to adjust his irrigation system to accommodate those. We then have to go back to the contractors, have them give us a new price for that material and for that work, scope of work. It also affects more than just simply taking out a tee, or taking out a bunker, or taking out a turf reduced area. When you do that, you're affecting multiple items on that unit cost bid form, and that would be the reason we would need to go back and have the contractors basically go completely back to the bid form, which pushes the project and timeline down the road. For one of the questions, I guess Paul sent this to me, the turf reduction, that's a kind of a big thing, I guess. The turf reduction was designed in concert with Marvin. So if Marvin puts his irrigation system in one of the areas of turf reduction, for example, is between holes number 1 and 2, the area to the left on that ridge line of those mounds. If we put in the irrigation system, but we don't do any of the turf reduction, the grass that's in there still will not be irrigated. So it'll still die regardless. Whether we put plants in there, whether we treat the ground and turn it back into what I call desert cobble or native soils, none of that work will get done and the grass will just die. So from an appearance standpoint, it'll look like you did something, but you really didn't follow through with it. One of the other questions that was asked, the project from here would be, once approved, there would be a contract between the owner, yourselves, and the contractor. That contract is developed based on an AIA document. It's a document it's 137 pages total when you consider the general conditions that go with the contract. But it really is a contract that protects the ownership pretty thoroughly. It's something that we've used in our industry for 40 years beyond. It outlines specifically, what the contractor is allowed to bill for. Any of the billings that they do come through my office first before they get passed on to you as the owner. I'm there to quality control, double check, same with Marvin. If a contractor submits a bid for, let's say says he's completed 4 holes of irrigation, but they've only completed 2, Marvin and I know that, we then don't allow that payment to go through. So that's kind of a little check for the ownership group. So that's kind of how we've got from the master plan to where we are today. The fun part, the numbers, which Joyce I know loves. And she's really talented at it, and I'll let her handle that part from here on out.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Can you just get this set up here? So, as Mike said, I'm the numbers person, so I've been spending quite a bit of time here lately, looking at these bids and trying to evaluate what it will mean for the finances of the HOA. As Mike has stated, the golf course is aging and overdue for renovation. And I just want to point out that the golf courses are assets of the HOA. And like any other asset, we have a responsibility to maintain those assets. So this is just part of the normal process that we do in order to keep our assets in a good condition. And this is something that we do reserve for in our reserve fund. So I just wanted to make sure everybody understood this isn't a special thing, although it is a large project. It is something that we will have to do routinely and we are responsible to do. So last year, as Mike said, the master plan was developed. And at that time, we took a look at the financial implications based on the best information we had at that time. And in July, the board authorized proceeding with obtaining bids for certain elements of the master plan. It didn't include everything, but it was the things that we thought really needed to get done. So now that we have the bids, I've been very busy evaluating the financial effects, and I'll present that today. And I want to say that many scenarios were modeled, and I want to express my great appreciation to Rhett Benedict, our former treasurer, for his help in this process. He's been a great sounding board for me and was invaluable in checking the integrity of the models. And I also want to point out that this is an informational meeting. As Therese said, no decisions are going to be made today. So in July of last year, we entered into the contracts with Mike Gogol for the design and Marvin Mills for the irrigation system design. And those two, as Mike said, are working closely together. The scope of the project is listed here. So it's basically the tee boxes, including the driving range, the bunkers, the irrigation system, turf reduction, and the cart path from hole number 9 to number 10. Greens are not included. Those were resurfaced in 2015. The project schedule originally was to do it over 2 years with 9 holes done in 23 and the other 9 holes in 24. But back in January, we started to reconsider this and we thought maybe we should look at doing it in 1 year, in 23. So we did ask that Mike modify his bid request form to include both options, a 1 year and a 2 year option. So here's how the bids came in. So of the 6 contractors that were invited to bid, 3 actually submitted bids. As I understand it, the other 3 were just busy and scheduled already, and so we could not get bids from them. So these 3 bids for the 1 year project vary quite a bit, with Desert Reflections being the lowest at $5.7 million, and Frontier coming in at a whopping $10.8 million, and then ProTurf at $7.1. And you can see below that the estimates for the 2 year project. So how does this compare to what we thought before? Well, here you can see the leftmost column is what we were projecting back in January. And that totaled for the whole project about $4.2 million. Now, as you can see, the Desert Reflections, which is the only one that I'm going to talk to today because they're the lowest and most affordable, and is 5.7 million. So that's 1.4 million more than what we estimated. So the question is, what does that mean for our financials? Well, most of this would come from our reserve fund. All of the golf course elements that were listed on the previous page, the bunkers, the tees, the irrigation system, and turf reduction would all come out of our reserve fund. And that totals about $5.5 million. The cart path cannot come out of the reserve fund because it's something new. And so the reserve fund is only for repairs and replacements of existing assets. So that would have to come from somewhere else. So we have our capital improvement fund, and we also have a golf improvement fund. So those 2 funds could be the source for the funding of that cart path project. And for modeling purposes, I've assumed a 50-50 split between those two funds. Comes out to about $97,000 for each fund. And at this point, we have plenty of resources to cover that. The CIF balance at the end of last year was $1.4 million, and the GIF balance was $160,000. And there aren't any major GIF projects in the works as of now. So the reserve fund pays for major repairs and replacements of all of our HOA2 assets, not just golf. So it has to cover the MountainView, Desert View, preserve facilities, our property site, our roads, all of that. We are currently in the process of getting a new reserve study. And so that's something that I've been taking a look at, because that is, while it's not yet finalized, it's a much better estimate than what we had before of all of the costs that we're going to have. And one of my underlining assumptions in doing the modeling was that we need to preserve the resources necessary to complete currently anticipated projects vital to maintaining our HOA infrastructure. In other words, the golf projects must fit in financially without diminishing or sacrificing the necessary work in other areas. The reserve study has come in for all the other areas besides golf over the period of 23 through 28 at about 2.2 million over what we had before. So those numbers, the new reserve study numbers, are the numbers that I've been using in my evaluation. And I wanted to make sure that we're still going to be able to cover everything we need to cover. So what options do we have to fund those reserves? Well, first we have a dues increase that we could have. But remember that dues have to cover all of our operating expenses as well as fund the reserves. So we have to take into consideration when we're looking at this, the current inflationary environment that we're in and what that might mean for our budgets going forward. So that was something that we took into consideration as we were running through these models. Another area source of funding would be a special assessment. A board could approve up to $300 per household. I don't want anybody to faint out there. $300 per household. So the board has the authority to do that. Anything above that would require homeowner approval. We could also get some outside financing. We have received a proposal to finance up to the entire project cost at a rate of 5.75% over 60, 72, or 82 months, so over 5, 6, or 7 years. And of course, we could look at other financing options. Another source we could look at is the CIF. This is the money that comes from home resales. So every year, the board authorizes a portion of that to be allocated to the reserve fund, and this is done during the annual budget process. So we've been allocating for this year 25%. So that's something that could be increased if we thought that that would help to fund the projects. And we have one other source, possible source of funding, and that is our operating fund cash. We could transfer operating fund cash that's not anticipated to be needed for operating expenses in the foreseeable future. So what does that mean? Well, a common guideline for cash that should be held in your operating fund is 2 or 3 months of operating expenses. For us, that works out for 3 months to be about 1.7 million. And our current operating fund balances are well above that amount. So one possibility is to move some of that cash over to the reserve fund, and in essence, we could start paying down early the loan that we had to purchase the golf courses. So some of you may remember back in 2018, when we purchased the golf courses from Robeson for $2 million, we actually borrowed that money out of our reserve fund, and we've been paying it back at a rate of $100,000 a year. And that was stipulated at the time to be $100,000 a year for 20 years. So we've made 4 payments so far, so the balance is down to 1.6 million. So one of the possibilities is if we have some cash that we don't think we're going to need for operations in the foreseeable future, is that we could repay that loan early. So just to give you a flavor of how our cash and operating budget area looks, this is, let's see if this works. So this is the normal cash flow that we have during the year. So you can see that in the early part of the year, boy, our cash really spikes up. This is 2020, this is 2021, this is where we are so far this year. So cash really spikes up because we're getting our dues payments in, we're getting the golf annuals in, we're getting punch card payments, and then that gradually goes down as we use it for operating expenses. And then come June, we collect the second half of the dues, and it pipes back up again. And then November is kind of our low point here, and then we start getting in dues and annuals for the next year. So I want to point out that this is where we've been. As you can see that our balance at the beginning of the year was something like $5 million. That included, the dues that had been collected at the end of last year and the annual payments. But this line here, this gray line going all the way across, that's the 1.7 million that's recommended for a minimum balance. That would be 3 months worth of expenses. So you can see we've been well above that. So this star here says, okay, what's our projected year-end balance for 2023? And this is the balance here. It's about 2.2 million that we're projecting. That excludes any cash that's collected at the end of the year for the dues for the next year or for the annuals for the next year. So we're not distorting it for that type of thing. So you can see and this is also after I've assumed we moved $800,000 over to the reserve fund. So even after moving the $800,000, we're well above the recommended minimum balance. Another thing we had to consider is the 1-year versus 2-year project. So if we do it 1 year, we have to close the course for 6 months. If we do it 2 years, we close the course twice, 2 years in a row, for 4 months in each year. We tried to estimate what that would mean to our financial situation if we're not collecting that revenue during the period of times, and what people might do as far as buying an annual. So we did the survey that I'm sure many of you participated in a couple months ago, and what that showed was that a significant number of annual pass holders told us that they would not purchase an annual under either the 1 or the 2 year project. 85% of the people who hold annuals responded to the survey. Of those, only 59% indicated they would still buy an annual under the 2 year option. So if we lose that many annuals, we lose about $500,000 in revenue. And if we do it 1 year, okay, we lose $500,000. If we close the course 2 years in a row, we lose $500,000 in each of those 2 years. So the 1 year option is certainly better financially, and it was preferred by a majority of the survey respondents. So now I want to cover the scenarios that I've modeled. There's many possibilities. So I've just chosen 3 to present here, but there are many others that I have investigated and I could investigate. I modeled both the 1 and 2 year options, but I'm only going to show here the 1 year option since it makes the most sense financially. So the 3 options are in scenario A, it's the cost is bid with no contingency and no special assessment. And the contingency is for what Mike was talking about before, that the contractor will have the opportunity to come back and tell us that their costs have gone up and and so they need an increase in the amount. I'm told that generally speaking, this would be maybe a 10% contingency. This is something that would have to be negotiated when we do the contract. So in this first scenario, I assume no contingency. It's just straight as it was bid, the 5.6 million. In scenario B, it's the bid plus a 10% contingency, but still no special assessment. And in scenario 3, it's got the bid plus the contingency and a $300 per household special assessment. All of these scenarios have the same basic assumptions in them. And as I was saying, there could be many scenarios, because you could tweak every one of these in so many combinations that we just couldn't count them all. But all of these have the same. So a dues increase is anticipated in each of these scenarios at 10% in 2023, then it goes down to 5, and eventually down to 3. The CIF allocation is assumed to stay at the 25% level that we currently have. The operating revenue inflation factor is at 3%, and the operating expense inflation factor is at 5%, growing a little more quickly than the revenues. Interest earned on our investments is at 1.5%. All of these models assume that we finance the irrigation system at 5.75% over 5 years. And what you see here is what the annual payment would be. So that would be about $828,000 per year. And I've listed here the funding that would come from the operating fund in these scenarios. So again, it's $800,000 in the first year, and then $200,000 in each of the next 4 years, and that will complete the repayment of the prior golf loan from the reserve fund. And I've also listed here the funding from dues. This is based on what the reserve study is recommending as funding. So that's one of the things that we do get out of the reserve study. It's not just the expenditures over time, but they also recommend what the funding level should be in order to have this funds when we need them. So here's what they look like when you get to this point. So you can see that the scenario A is the orange one up there. That's the one with no contingency, no special assessment. So that's the one that's kind of in the middle line there. And scenario B with the contingency is a little bit worse. And scenario C with the contingency and special assessment brings it back up a little better. Now the gray shaded area up there, that band, is what I'm calling the minimum balance comfort zone. So in reviewing the various scenarios, it's helpful to compare the reserve balances in each with a minimum goal. And there's many ways to determine such a goal. In past presentations, the goal has been just one solid line that's been determined based on, okay, for you math people, it's based on the average uninflated annual expenditures over a specified period, and then inflated by year over planned years. So that's one way to do it. Another way is to look at an average of what's going to be needed for the next 3 or 5 years. It could also be a certain amount that the board feels comfortable with. There's no right or wrong way to determine that goal, and that's sort of why I put in a band here. But key factors to consider are tolerance for risk, the level above or below the minimum balance, and the length of time the projected balance remains above or below the goal. So, and keep in mind that all that white space underneath that line is cash in the reserve fund that's still there. So the reserve fund is not going to zero. It's not going down to $100,000. In all of these scenarios, it's above the $2.5 million. For those of you who like numbers, here are the numbers that are behind this for scenario B. That is the one with the 10% contingency and no special assessment. So this is showing the beginning balance and then where the funding comes from, less the expenditures. So I've broken out here the golf construction project expenditures and then everything else. So you can see that we still have a lot of other expenditures to cover from this reserve fund as well. And then we come to our ending balance. So my conclusion is that, while we have alternative scenarios that can be considered and probably should be considered, based upon this analysis, the project looks like it can be completed while still keeping our reserve balances above or near the minimum balance goal, keeping the financial impact to homeowners at a reasonable and manageable level, and all while continuing to support the HOA's total infrastructure needs. So, next steps. As I said, this is an informational meeting. There will be no decisions made today. But in order to get a contract in place that will ensure that we'll have somebody here to do the good work next year, we need to get this done this month, by the end of May. So at our next board meeting, which is next week, the 18th, I would hope that the board would have the opportunity to mull all of this over. We'll discuss it today, and that by next week we'll be able to make a decision on two things, whether we go with the 1-year or 2-year option, and which contractor we go with. After that, we would be into contract negotiations. Now, an important part of making these decisions, of course, is can we afford this project? And that's what I've been trying to show today. The fine details of exactly how we could fund it don't have to be decided in the next week. We have some time, we can work this through the budget process, but these other two decisions are something that we need to come to in the next week or so. And that concludes my presentation. So board members, comments, questions?
This is Therese, and these questions are for Mike, so you might want to come back up to the mic. But actually, Dan, maybe we should start with you because we can't see you raising your hand from where we are. So we'll let you go ahead with questions first.
Well, the only thing I will start with is I really appreciate the work that Joyce has put into this. Obviously, it's been a lot, and I think it's covered an awful lot of the bases for me in the analysis of this overall project. So thank you, Joyce. A lot of hours and a lot of effort here, and Red as well. So that's really a foundation for us to move forward on. I think that the basic premise that we can afford this is really the overriding issue in my mind, the details of which are yet to be worked out, but it's clear to me that the notion of redoing our MountainView golf course is possible, even with the inflation factors we've seen, and I think that's an important outcome of this analysis that Joyce has done. We can get into a lot more details than that, but I'll just start off by saying thank you again, Joyce, and that's my takeaway. So I'm going to give it to someone else to ask more questions.
Okay, I have a few. Mike, in your slide on the expected life cycle, you do talk about HDPE, and that hasn't been out there long enough. Is our project bid, I'm assuming that's a kind of pipe?
Yes, it's a kind of pipe, and Marvin may be able to elaborate on this even more. It's significantly thicker wall pipe than what you're used to maybe seeing at Home Depot, or I've seen when Paul's out working on his staff's working to repair an irrigation leak. When I say it hasn't been out long enough, it's been out plenty long enough to do, to understand nothing's fail safe, but this stuff is, the layman's term is it's almost bulletproof. As sections of pipe are put together, they're fused together, which becomes obviously, it's like healing a broken bone. The break's stronger than the bone itself, and pipe would be very similar to that.
And is this what we're bidding, or has
Yes.
been bid on this project?
Yes.
Thank you. So,
Can I say something real quick? Just so you know, I mean, previously PVC was a lot higher with the system that you have out there right now, but after this pandemic and everything that's going on, the HDPE pipe is actually at a lower cost than the PVC. So we didn't put the higher priced product on the golf course, we put the better product on your golf course.
thank you.
Cool.
So, and I think you may have kind of alluded to this already, but with the fact that, I mean, and I understand it because there's no sense having a contractor if the contractor's going to go broke, and in our rate of inflation right now, that they have to have some protection. But can you talk a little bit about how we protect ourselves, our HOA, from taking on more burden than we may be willing to come time of renegotiation? Or what we would have signed in our contract in May that will allow us to be comfortable with expenditures?
Correct. So when we go through and we put together the contract between the owner and the contractor, there'll be, in your Lloyd, you know, I think I've already sent you a copy of the contract, or somebody, I know we've seen, Paul has seen it, and maybe he shared it with you. But you guys will have a copy of that and send it to your lawyers, and they can go through with a fine tooth comb. And then there's provisions in there where we can add clauses to, you know, the contractor has the ability to relook at their prices in X time frame in 23, because Lord knows, I mean, we're spending through the nose right now for multiple things. And where that's going to go, nobody knows. So what that does is they go through and renegotiate. If we get to a certain number, we don't have to execute the contract. It does not have to go forward. We will be able to say, you know, listen, this is beyond our financial means at the moment, and we'll revisit this in a year, or whenever the case may be.
Thank you. I have a couple more.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment because I know there's been some questions about, you know, are we doing a lot of extra things that aren't necessary? And Mike, to his credit, in the original plan, gave us all sorts of options that probably would have been really fantastic to do that we discounted because we knew we wouldn't be able to afford it. Things like a full putting course on the putting green, rebuilding the complete putting green. There were numerous things that were great ideas perhaps, and we simply just said, we're going to have to really do what we would consider bare bones to get the course and the quality of play that we want. And that's what we want for bid 4. So really what the bid reflects is our view of what we think really is the minimum to get the quality of the course where it needs to be and get it rebuilt where it needs to get rebuilt. So I know that's been a question that's been, at least I've seen asked by a couple of people. I just wanted to kind of make that comment.
It also, that's kind of, you know, touch point is the master plan. The reason for doing a master plan in this scenario is that by electing to do certain items, we can then, like you mentioned, the putting course or things like that, we know we can do that at a later time and account for that at this stage without potentially doing something now where they have to then go and redo in 2 years' time, 5 years' time, or if that project is elected to move forward down the road. So we're not going to spend the money now and then tear it up in short order and essentially waste that money.
So I want to follow up a little bit on Mark's comment. You know, since we got the bids, there's been all kinds of what ifs, people throwing out what if scenarios. And I think you convinced me at least that, you know, I understand project integration, believe me. But could you talk a little bit about how the current plan was vetted with the SaddleBrooke golf community, who's involved, you know, how you got input from, you know, homeowners, the golf committee, the golf pros, you know, the golf superintendent, you know, who all was involved and kind of how that process worked out?
Yeah, so, and I apologize because I'm horrible with names to some degree, especially when we weren't able to meet as much face-to-face as in a normal scenario. But we had a golf committee and a master plan committee where we went through, I would come up with concepts, we'd sit down, we had 5 or 6, 7 Zoom calls where we went through the whole entire scenario. There was towards the end of the pandemic where we were actually able to get on site, go through each hole by hole, look at certain scenarios, look at certain areas of the golf course where there were concerns. So it was club staff, maintenance staff, golf committee, master plan committee, I think that's what we called it. And then beyond that, obviously, some of the board members, or current board members, were involved with it as well during that master plan phase.
Okay.
Joyce, I have another question. Or
Go ahead.
Therese. One of the things that I had asked Paul about, and he did a lot of work, and we're looking at a delta 1.4 million difference from what we had originally anticipated versus what the bids came in. And I said, hey, Paul, why can't we just do 14 holes and call it a day? Obviously, I didn't really say that, but, I did ask him where he thought there might be opportunity to cut back a bit, just cost reduction on the project in total. So Paul, I wonder if you can speak to that a little bit. I hate to take a lot of time here, but I think it's important for people to hear your view of this because you are our resident staff expert in this whole project. So anyway.
I made some slides, Dan, just for you.
Oh, Paul, you're super. I can't see them, but that's great.
I'm not sure I can see them yet. Okay, so here's a chart I had come up with, and this speaks to some of Dan's stuff, but this is where I took the actual project costs and broke them down into the 6 categories for a funding model. So this is line for line, 1 through 6, of pretty much what each category ends up costing at the end of the day. And then I did some numbers here where I had no tees, that would take off $474,000. I did a plan where we modified the tees, which a modified tee would not be a new tee, it would just be the tees to be resurfaced, so we would skin the grass off that's there now, regrade those, and then resod. And then the turf reduction number I had, it's gonna happen as we discussed, as Mike Gogol discussed, that it's already in the irrigation plan. But that number, that bulk of that number right there is for the revegetation, right? And so that's one option that could be had is $346,000 for turf reduction. There's some secondary effects from what I'm calling scope minus down at the bottom that I wrote up there. Number one would be you're going to have turf reduction scars long term because the irrigation is already designed. So by that we mean the turf reduction is going to happen. And if we don't have a plan to replant and revegetate, it's just going to be scars on the landscape, right? So it's going to give us a shabby, not really like we finished the project type effect when we open back up. And like I said, number 2 is on the tees. Right now we have huge maintenance issues on the tees because they're not big enough for a lot of our equipment to maintain properly, right? And that's a lot of the problem with our current tees. And another problem with some of the current tees is we don't even use them. I mean, there's holes where there's just a tee, I think I mow and grow for myself, right? We never put the tee markers on there. So number 2 is the same old tees, same old shape, same old size. So within a few years, same old problems, right? We're just going to be back to the same issues. Number 3, I have that there's going to be costs associated, as Mike spoke to, for new irrigation design, new design for different tees and different turf reduction if we went down this road. Because everything is on a layered basis. It's all interconnected. So when Mr. Gogol did his design, Mr. Mills laid his irrigation design on top of what Mr. Gogol designed. So I call the Goggle bunkers, the Goggle tees, the Goggle turf reduction. That's what this whole plan is on. It's not based on anything that we have currently, right? So taking any part of this project out of the interconnection is gonna have some long-term effects because there's gonna be other costs associated. And then number 4 is just, long-term effects preserve is also gonna be on the list somewhere down the line. If we decided to move something like the T's, number 3, off of this list, where do we fit them in moving forward, right? Because they still need to be done. They're still 27 years old. So that was that part of it. Then I wrote up a huge thing that I won't go word to word because I don't want everyone to pass out and fall asleep. But all this stuff is what I just talked about in a nutshell. I just gave you a summary. But some of the highlights of the irrigation drainage are original, 25 plus years old. They're flat out the 2 most important infrastructure items on any golf course. No irrigation, no drainage equals no turf. So, in our life cycle, in our harsh desert environment, it's a 20-year life cycle pretty much. And so the bunker is pretty much the same thing. Everything's 25 plus years old. Technically, bunkers have a rebuild cycle of 12 to 15 years. If we went on the harsh environment and went with the 12 years, we'd be on our 3rd set of bunkers right now. We're on set number 1 still. Same thing with the tees. I'm not going to beat the dead horse. The tees have a little bit different life cycle. They're 15 years of life expectancy, but as I spoke to, it's the same issue. The range tee just broken off because it's a little bit different of an animal. And also, the range tee technically has a shorter life expectancy than regular tees because it gets everyone that's playing golf is on the range tee, right? And it's just usually 1 tee, even though it's huge. And also, the current design includes a tee line, a synthetic tee line on the back of these range tees. It's very standard practice in the construction of range tees today to do that. HOA 1 has one, El Conquistador has one. This allows for maintenance time. You can close the actual grass surface down and people can shoot from the mats that day or a week or 1 day every week or 2 days every 2 weeks, whatever that practice may be agreed upon. So this is a good addition. The cart path, I don't have a lot to discuss about except for the fact that I can tell you the irrigation main line is going to go across that same direction. And it makes a lot of sense if we're going to go through there with heavy equipment and put in an irrigation main line that we could have a cart path to address the safety issue of the cars shooting down through the parking lot the whole length. And then the turf reduction like I spoke to. So I think that answers your question, Dan?
If I can see it, I'm sure it does.
Paul, a quick question for you. I know that there's a lot of unit pricing in the bid package. Is there a specific unit price per square foot for like the sand traps specifically? So if we had a few sand traps we decided we didn't want to add, we'd have the option to do it without redesigning everything?
I know you were going to ask this question, Mark. All right, so here we go. I got it for bunkers and I broke it up for tees. So cost per bunker on average is about 22 grand, right, per bunker. Cost per square foot is average about $19.32 for the amount of square footage we end up with. It's not the square footage we have now, but it's the amount we end up with. And the same thing, I broke tees out the same way. On average, they're about $8,000 a pop. It's $488 a square, and we end up with 140,000 square feet, give or take. Once again, not what we have now. They both end up being less area to maintain overall. If you look at the bunkers, we have a -2 at the end of the day with this plan. We're dropping about 25,000 square feet, which impacts everything moving forward from not only maintenance standpoints, but when you get to the 12 years and it's time to do the bunkers again, we're doing 25,000 less square feet of bunkers the next time around than we're doing today. And the same thing with the tees. You can see it's a minus 43,000 square feet. So we're dropping off almost an acre of tees overall. And so this is long-term cost savings also.
Hey, Paul, can I ask one more question?
And then that's it, I'm holding you to the one more question.
All right, fine. The reduction, as I understand it, and I think Mike had suggested that there, maybe you or Mike, I can't remember, but that there is legislation that is coming through the Arizona government body, whatever that is, that will basically mandate water for golf courses and the amount of water golf courses can use going forward. So the turf reduction, although kind of an issue as a side project a bit, is really something is almost unavoidable over the next few years, I would assume, unless you just want to have a bunch of land that you don't put water on and let it go to heck. Is that, did I correctly say what I thought I heard you guys say?
Yes, correct. So 2025, let's just throw the stake in the ground for that year, because it'll be easier to explain. The mandate's gonna be, as it sits right now, you're gonna get acre foot of water for 85 acres of turf. So we need to be, you don't need to be at anything, to be honest with you. We could be 125 acres of turf, but you're still only gonna get 85 acres worth of stipend for water. So it behooves us to be at 85 or less, because we're still, even if we're at 80, we're still gonna get 85 acres stipend of water, right? So we'd like to have a little bit in the bank, so we go through the drought year and we can, determine what we put the extra water to, and we can have a priority list. We'd much rather have a priority list that way with a little extra in the bank than for me to come into a golf committee or a board meeting and say, we're gonna have to stop watering rough all summer because we need that water to keep the greens, fairways, and tees alive. So you are correct, Dan.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Could you or Mike talk, I know we talked when I was on the committee last year about the amount of impact the turf reduction would actually really have on playability of the course, as far as how significant would people notice the turf reduction?
I think you'd notice it, but, my parents are the same age, right? My mom's 76, my dad will be 80 in July. They still,
Same age.
well, so Dan.
You look good for it.
Yeah. So when I'm doing this, to take it a step further, my brother is on the PGA Tour Champions. So we've got somebody who's a great player in the family, and we've got our parents who, my dad's best round ever was 78. So I'm trying to balance, how does the person playing from the further back tees enjoy the game as much as the person who's playing from the forward tees? And so to that end, when I'm doing turf reduction, I'm really taking more into account the forward tee player and the players that can only fly maybe 130 yards or 100 yards. And I make it a point to not try and take out turf in front of those tees. The turf would be taken out on the sides. So for instance, as I alluded to earlier, between holes 1 and 2, left of 10 across the cart path and the driving range on that hillside. So those are the areas where we're taking out the biggest swaths of turf grass, left of 18, between 18 and the range. So none of those areas should affect the golf hole playability, because there's still plenty of turf grass that you're carrying it to or playing on, as opposed to being off to the sides.
Question on the turf reduction, following up on that. Do we currently irrigate any of the course that is not green grass? I mean, we say we have to put an irrigation system in,
So,
and it's tied to turf reduction. I'm trying to.
so the turf reduction is tied to the irrigation system, not the other way around. So currently, for instance, between those areas I just mentioned, between 18 and the range, 18 in the range, 1 and 2, those areas are irrigated currently. And the new irrigation design, this also keeps the head count down, keeps the cost of the installation of the designs, the irrigation system down. there no longer will be heads in those areas. So there's no irrigation.
And what would we put in that area where we would remove turf?
Wood, trees, native plant material, native tree cover. There will still be drip irrigation in some of those areas, especially for the trees. Hydro seed, a native plant material back in there. So it won't be so thick that you can't find your golf ball. I don't want it to look like, for instance, riding number 10 tees. I don't want it to look like the hillside. It'll be less plant material. There'll be some barrel cactus or some prickly pear, some chain fruit choys or something like that. A few, brittle bush, simple plants, but easy to maintain. The spacing will be such that as far as the maintenance stability standpoint goes, they can get in fairly easily and maintain it. It's not going to be a very thick desert replant in those areas.
Okay. The other question I had when you're looking at the type of cost increases, and some of it driven certainly by inflation, to say the least. But when you get to that point, you got to look hard at everything, in my opinion. Well, let's go back to the cart path. Let me ask a couple questions on that. It's identified as a safety issue, and there are options to eliminate the safety issue at no cost, which we've discussed at the board level. Didn't get a whole lot of support from it, but we discussed it. When you're down to where we're down, $193,000 is money, regardless of where it comes from. So are there opportunities to look at those types of things again and say, yeah, we can do that? You could route the carts through that area, eliminate the safety problem. I mean, if it's a safety problem with carts, then we're not going to start looking at cars going through there. They have to be a safety issue also. I mean, it's the logic of people coming to play tennis, etc. So I would advocate that we look at saving that cash and taking an option that doesn't cost us anything.
Yeah, that's not a fair question.
What's that?
I don't know that that's a question for myself to answer. I think that's something for the board to discuss internally.
Well, the golf committee, then, I guess, they're the ones that put it up as a, quote, safety issue, so I would ask if they would consider.
Thank you very much, sir.
That wasn't an invitation, it was for Paul.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me, sir. First of all, the genesis of the cart path was the 2016 report that was provided for this community by the Borders Golf Group. In that report, they suggested that this community look at an alternative pathway for moving cart traffic from number 9 to number 10. So we in the golf committee did chase this rabbit down the hole, and we worked with staff. And this was not developed by the golf committee. We worked it. We worked it in concert with the board liaisons. We worked it in concert with the staff. Here's the observation. We're trying to, and I had a response to one of our neighbors this morning on this very subject. We're trying to reduce the risk, not eliminate it. Because golf carts come through this Mountain View area for a multitude of reasons, to include tenants, to go to the admin building, etc. So yes, you could flip the 9, sir. I'm sure that's one of the things you're thinking about. The problem is we have a business model that says we need to encourage outside play. All outside play that comes to this Mountain View golf course gets a golf cart down at the golf shop end of the complex. At the end of the round, if you made number 9, number 18, they still would have to traverse across the entire parking lot, take those golf carts back. You still have a safety issue. So you can flip it around, but if you're going to encourage people to come play here, you ought to consider the risk that you're putting at going to the parking lot. Some people don't think it's a risk. Some people haven't been almost hit out there. Not all of us have the same opinion.
Well, I apologize. You may have never seen the option that I put forth and what had discussed, which was simply to come out of number 9 to the first intersection, turn left, go to the street, follow the street all the way down like we currently do, and turn back up into the golf area. It is an elimination of the traffic through this area.
Well, I'll just point out that that is an option right now, and nobody does that. There's no way you can force people to go on the street, and I don't think that that's necessarily any safer.
If it's not safer, we allow carts on all of our streets. I've had a loss understanding that.
Well, one thing I would say, and having been a golfer in the past and hoping as soon as I get off this board, I may actually become a golfer again. Just in time for my favorite course to close down for 6 months. Hey, that's okay, I understand. What I do see, and I spend a lot of time up here, in and out of admin all the time, is the difference between one of us tooling along in our golf carts to go somewhere versus going from number 9 to number 10. And I know a lot of you out there are golfers, and how many of you, will you raise your hand honestly and say, between number 9 and number 10, I am counting my first 9, I'm not paying attention to what I'm doing when I'm driving my cart. Nobody does that. Oh, okay, thank you. Well, that's bad. Maybe then Don has a point. Everybody's so safe. But I can tell you, as a driver up here trying to pull out in reverse, I can tell you how many people are doing that. Or when it's 15 miles an hour, you've got your golf cart gunned as high as it will go. It is scary, in my opinion, but that's not something we have to solve today. Do you have any more questions? Because I want to ask Joyce something. Go ahead, Don.
Go ahead, I'll get back on later.
Okay, so a couple of questions I have, Joyce. In your slide that shows the year-end balance, and this is the one that has your graph and the star, you show year-end balance of the star at 2023, and I want to make sure that's what you meant, 2023 and not 2022.
Yeah, what I was trying to project there is that if we go ahead and follow our normal operations, and if we use $800,000 and transfer that from the operating fund to the reserve fund at the end of 2023, because that would happen next year, we would be at that balance where the star was, which is about 2.2 million, versus the minimum balance line, if you remember, was about 1.7 million.
And I have another question for you on, when you talk about financing and you show the numbers for financing, I think I understand that what you're talking about financing is just the irrigation component and not the full expenditures of all the other elements?
Yes, that's right. The models all include financing just the irrigation component, although we did get a proposal that we could borrow all the way up to the total amount of the contract, construction contract if we wanted to. But the modeling is just on irrigation.
And would you explain why?
Well, I don't think we need to finance the whole project. I think that the financing the irrigation system would be make the project more manageable. But if we finance the whole project and we have that much more financing cost to bear, well, I don't think we need to do that. So we could finance the irrigation, we could finance something less than the irrigation, but that's what was modeled here.
Okay, and then once again, I just want to go over a couple of things, because you were showing right now having the CIF funds that would go to reserves at 25% a year, but as we get closer to budget, if we choose to look at other scenarios, 75%, 90%, whatever it may be, then that in turn is also going to impact what possibly could be percent of dues or other things, correct?
if we decided to allocate more of the CIF to the reserve fund, for every 10% that we might increase that'd be about $45,000 more that would go to the reserve fund and less to the CIF. Because we collect about 400,000, and in recent years we've collected more because home resales have been faster. So that answer your question?
Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to hear. Because I was on the board in 2016 when we worked very hard to get that CIF amendment, voted on by our community. And Bill's here too today. One of the major components for me in being able to advocate going to a CIF was to know that we had another resource besides dues to augment our reserves, which I think helps people's pocketbooks. So to me, that is important.
I'd like to ask another question, potentially. Hello?
Go ahead.
They're listening.
Okay, no, I didn't hear an okay on that. Since I'm out of questions for Paul, I'm gonna ask Mike a question if I could. On that, it relates to the cart path, Mike. That part of that cart path, I thought, was a major line between 9 and 10, major irrigation line, and the cart path will follow that line. I could be wrong about that, but that's what I assumed. If in fact I am correct, of the $200,000 for the cart path, how much of that are we going to spend anyway for the irrigation line? You may not have that segregated out. Maybe it's just a roughly right guess on your part. I don't know.
Irrigation not part of that, or cart path.
Yeah, no, you are correct about the irrigation main line connecting between 9 and 10. So that is correct. The cart path would follow that same route. As far as the dollar figures being a part of the concrete work, they're not. It's a completely separate. Basically, the main line is going regardless.
It's part of the irrigation.
It's part of the irrigation cost. Yeah.
So if we don't do a cart path, then that money completely goes away. That line install is part of the irrigation contract as it stands. Is that the way I understand it?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Mike, one question I've got, because I walked the hill with you guys when you were looking at that hill, and it's obviously pretty steep, which is probably why it's expensive.
It's
Is there
rock.
any, yeah, is there any concern, I guess, I'm assuming there's some sort of retaining walls and all sorts of stuff in that price. Is there anything we should be concerned about during monsoons that regardless of how they build it, we may have to be repairing it every few years and washing it away because it is kind of a steep hill?
Yeah, no, I don't think we won't have those scenarios, but with the grading, we'll actually, like similar to what they're now, there's a drainage ditch back, if you've never been up on this hillside behind here, there's a drainage ditch to help divert the water, so when you do get the monsoons, it doesn't end up in this room. The cart path would be actually another element to help with that. There would be curbing on the downstream side of that cart path. We would then help to direct the water to appropriate areas to let the water off so that it doesn't get into this building or any other buildings or the parking lot. So that's part of the grading exercise that would go into that.
Don, do you have more questions? Are any board
Yeah,
member?
just a couple of quick ones. The loan that we're looking at from Rainbird, is that just a standard loan, or is it like a credit line drawdown until the construction is complete, then converts over to a standard loan? Or is it just?
Are you done asking?
Yeah.
Okay, Joyce is looking for that info, so in the meantime, give it to Chuck. Did you find it? No, okay.
It looks like it's just a standard 5 to 7 year term loan or capital lease. I can show you the term sheet that we have here, Don.
One of the things when I was running for the board last year, I got inundated with comments from homeowners saying that one of the things that they're looking for from the new board members is to try to keep the dues increases and any assessments down to an absolute minimum, if any at all. And since this issue popped up a few weeks ago, I've been also, many people have asked me, are we going to have increases in our dues because of this? And I guess one of my questions is, how much of a reduction in the 5.7 million would we have to see in order to pretty much guarantee we will not see increases or assessments to the homeowners for this particular project?
If we reduce the dues by 1%, that equals about $100,000 in lost revenue. So if you wanted to cut the project by 500,000, if you could cut the project by 500,000, you could put the dues back down to 5%. Or you could find the funding from somewhere else. There's multiple levers that we can use. But a 1% reduction in the dues is about $100,000.
But would that also keep us above the minimum cash that we're looking for?
It would in the short term if you did only 1 or 2%. In the longer term, if you had something bigger, it would not.
5% is, I don't think most homeowners want 5% as a goal of increases in their assessments every year. I think most people are looking at 1 to 2% would be nice, but to sit there and say we're going to assume that 5% every year because of this project is a hefty amount.
The increase is not just because, in the modeling, it's not just because of the project. We're looking at increases in inflation for all of our other costs as well. So it was anticipated that would cover those increases as well. Now, as we get through the budget process and we have a better idea, those are the things that we can take a look at. Do we need to go to 10%? Do we not? But we're probably going to be looking at something more than the 4% that we had anticipated just because of inflationary factors right now.
And what year is the preserve project on the drawing boards?
The greens are in this modeling. The greens are out there in 2026, as well as the pump station out there, and the rest of the project, the bunker cities, etc., would be in 2029. So if you remember the chart that I showed with the reserve balance, you'll see that it goes way up there in like 2028 because it's in anticipation of we're going to have this other work to do.
And I guess, I'm not sure if the golf committee would answer this. Did the golf committee look at any other options for financing similar to what pickleball did? I know pickleball came up with 600 members. They were able to come up with over $1,500 in donations, contributions to build their pickleball courts. Was there a committee put together from the golf committee, a subcommittee, looking at ways that they can raise money to build this?
As far as I understand, that for this MountainView project, there was not something like that was contemplated. But when we're looking at some of the preserve work, particularly like redoing the hole number 10 at the preserve, that I know Matt has been sort of investigating what our options might be there to raise additional funds out of. Matt, do you want to speak to that?
We have met with the brains behind the SPA initiative where they've gotten plenty of money out of my pocket, thank you, dear. We have asked our board liaisons for guidance as far as what the authorities of the golf committee would be in putting a task force together to raise money. The reason why we need to raise money is our charter is we're responsible for helping playability and enjoyability of our members. The number one complaint we receive is the playability of number 10 at the preserve. As a golfer, I would agree with that assessment. I don't care what skill level you play at, number 10 is a badly designed hole. In the work that we've been doing with Mike, we asked him for a fix. He went out and worked with an engineer, and he came up with a $258,000 solution to make number 10 a very good golf hole. That money can't come from the reserve, because what we have to do is involves culverting and adding to the hole that exists there, but do work that the reserve wouldn't normally pay for. So the short answer is yes. We haven't received any guidance back from the board yet about what our authorities would be to do that. There's no playbook associated with how we do that. The difference between SPA and the golf community is I don't have 750 members to go out. We have 5 different organized groups here with 18 holders, 9 holders, and lady putters, and most of our golf community is not affiliated with any of our associations. And so when we're doing this kind of work, we're going to want to touch every person that benefits and enjoys playing on our golf course. But we want to do that very thing, Chuck.
Right now, there are, I think, 600, at the time, there were about 600 members of the SPA. And for the last survey that was done when I was on the strategic planning committee, I think they came up with somewhere around 2,000 to 2,500 golfers that golf regularly. Does that sound about reasonable?
Yeah, it sounds high to me. Go ahead.
Well, they came up about 35% of the, so I just wonder if the 600 members can come up with $1 million to raise, I wonder if between now and the end of the year, is there a way you can organize the golfers to come up with businesses and donations to subsidize this so the rest of the homeowners will not have to subsidize the golf operation?
Well, first of all, let's make sure that we have a clear delineation about roles and responsibilities. George clearly articulated that the golf courses, our golf enterprise, is part of the asset bank of this community.
Which pickleball is an amenity too.
Excuse me.
No.
Can I finish my thought? The golf courses belong to all of us. 73% of your green space in this community are our golf courses. They're an asset for everybody. They impact your home values, I promise you. If you don't believe me, go ask the good folks over at Vistoso. And so what we're trying to do is be a good partner. We're trying to marshal the golf community to support the board. The board's got to do its deal, then we can do our deal. And so we want to be a good partner with this board. We want to help in every way we can to help the board make quality decisions in forums like this, and to do things that haven't even been thought about yet by doing what Chuck's talking about, and that's coming out to you and selling you on the good thinking that Mike has given us on how we can make our golf courses better.
And I would venture to say that I would be very careful on where you go with this. And I only mention this if you're looking at something brand new, or your tennis says they want to put a brand new Ramada in, that's one thing to go look for money, like you were talking about. But your dues and what you signed as a homeowner in your contracts, whether you bought a new home or a resale, is that you were told you had X amenities and that your dues were responsible for the upkeep of those amenities. So as a swimmer, I don't want to be told that the next time the pool needs to be resurfaced, that I have to cough up the money to do that, or that the tennis club has to cough up the money to do what they're doing. I think we get down a very sticky road. As for pickleball, because they weren't guaranteed, it never was a part of our amenity package, that's why they went and raised the money. Now that's going to change as soon as those courts are completed and we end up with a $1.5 million facility, then we're going to be responsible for that. But I just caution about that type of road and where it could lead.
Well, and I want to point out a couple of other things too. First of all, the golfers already pay to play golf.
That's right.
So it's not like they're playing for free or for some subsidized dues. They're paying to play golf. The other thing is just from a practical perspective. If we need to go on contract in May, you know, we can't go on contract hoping that the golfers are going to come up with $1 million by December. It's just not a practical approach.
Yeah, I would say that for my information at least, the spa situation may have been slightly different since they were a club, not an amenity at the time. that they actively raised money, and I think I would agree with Teresa, it's a fine line that we walk. We've got to be careful how we go down that road. The only other thing I would point out, when it comes to finding opportunities to reduce cost, I think the one thing homeowners and the board have to take into consideration is the cost impact of compounding year-over-year increases. If you take a 10%, a 5 and a 5 and compound that into the future, you'll come up with a certain number of what you're going to pay in increased dues. If you start with 5 instead of 10, at 3 instead of 5, over the same time period, you're going to be charged a lot less money. So I think I'm still an advocate of finding everywhere that we can find a penny to save, because ultimately the homeowner community, be it golfers or non-golfers, are going to pay the bill one way or the other, all of us.
Let me just comment on that point about the compounding. Absolutely right. If you have a 10% and then a 5% and then a 5%, it's going to end up to be a lot higher than if you have a 5%, 5%, 5%. That also means if you have the 5%, 5%, 5%, there's less available to fund our amenities and our dues. So we can do that. Of course we can do that. We have many options. We'll need to look at other things like putting in more from the CIF and so on. So I just want to point out that the compounding goes both ways. So it's an increase to the homeowners, but then it means we have to find the money somewhere else.
Okay, is the board good with their questions for today? Okay. I'd like to take this opportunity to once again thank all of our presenters, all of the work that you have done so far, with our consultants, with Paul, with everybody who's worked hard on this, Joyce and Rhett. You've helped me to understand and give me a stronger feeling of confidence of moving forward. And I want to thank all the board members. We may not always agree on everything, but I believe we all have the interests of our members as the foremost reason for why we drive the reasonings that we independently do. And I want to thank you for that. With that, I will adjourn the meeting. It is open now for questions or comments pertaining only to the subject matter of today. If you do wish to speak, your name, unit, lot, and you have a maximum of 2 minutes. And if you would, we need you to go to the microphone so that you will be heard, because this is being recorded.
My name is Steve Lindquist. I'm in Unit 45, Lot 19. I first wanted to thank Don Grimm for a couple of comments he made, and I heard what I thought was some pushback in here. But Don, I wanted to let you know I appreciate anything you can do to save a nickel or a dime, because it all adds up. But relating to that particular subject, the golf cart path, it appears to me there's a couple $100,000 in there that, while yes, it might be nice to have some type of resolution for this perceived problem, I would ask the question, how many accidents have we had as a result of the carts coming through that parking lot? I mean, where there's been any physical damage or anybody was hurt or damaged. Have there been any? If there haven't, then I suggest that it might be valid to save that $200,000 and think real hard about Don's suggestion about routing those carts out and down the main road. We drive our golf courts all over this community every day, and for the most part, things seem to work out pretty well. So for $200,000, it's surely something we ought to be thinking about, I believe. That would do it for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna change mics or make sure it's working, but so I'll go over there right now with this one.
Thanks. I'm Lori Orland, and I live in Unit 29, Lot 16. I want to thank everybody for minimizing this plan from what it initially was. I think there were a lot of concerns at the original long-range plan at what the cost potentially could be. It seems to me that you've done a good job in trying to get this to the basics that people really feel are necessary and to keep our amenities up. I do want to say, though, that I am concerned about the concept of moving money out of our operational budget to cover this. I would urge you to look at different options. Part of it is we are not maintaining what we have now to the level that it should be in a lot of areas, and I don't understand how we have $800,000 potentially in an operating budget that could be moved. I could tell you right now where a lot of it needs to go. And every time that we raise something, we're told there's not money to do it. So I would argue that that is not an appropriate way to finance it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bob Eater, Unit 32, Lot 39. I want to talk about bunkers. We're apparently about 1.4 million gap between the contract that you're thinking about and trying to fund. And just a thought that might be worth considering. Bunkers are not the same thing as bunkers. There are greenside bunkers that are very critical to good play. Fairway bunkers can be waste areas. I'm wondering whether or not one possible way to save some money, at least in the short run, is to focus on greenside bunker remodeling and doing them properly. But on the fairway bunkers that you're choosing to keep, they could be waste bunkers. They could have minimum changes done to them, minimum corrections, and we could play out of them. And I don't think most golfers would find that to be a problem of play. Where they do find a problem of play in golf is the greenside bunkers. It'd be a short-term kind of fix, but it might get you through some of that gap.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to address the cart path between 9 and 10. Around 2016, maybe a little bit earlier that, I had a long talk with David Williams at that time, where he brought up the suggestion that this is what he'd like to go ahead and see happen. We talked for around 15, 20 minutes, and it was mainly because of the safety in the parking lot. Now, the times that golf carts use our parking lot to go between 9 and 10 is normally the heavy time would be between 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock during the day. And you figure that maybe we had 200 golf carts, no, 200 tee times that go through there. So it's really not a lot that's going through that area. The big problem that we have is what bashers have. We got people that don't know how to drive. We go, pure and simple folks. We go ahead, we all have these fancy cars with cameras. I have one. Every time I put it in reverse and start back, if there's a cart coming up, or there's a car coming, or a pedestrian, I hear beep, 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 and I stop. Unfortunately, a lot of people do not do this. So we have to figure out something to go ahead and make it a little safer in the parking lots. The parking lots have been talked about for safety. In the one that we have for minimal amount of cars going to the Mesquite. I mean, it just doesn't handle the people that can come up there. Nothing has ever been done about that in 20 years that I've been here. And it's a money problem, I don't think. I think what would be the best thing is not do anything about the cart path between 9 and 10. And facetiously, I'd call it Damon Williams Freeway. That's where, we talked about it, he and I. And what I would like to see is take that $193,000 and do something that will provide revenue for our place. trying to do a first-class golf course, and we got a third world pro shop. We tried at the beginning to make a big pro shop, and we couldn't let it come out with a new building and everything. Why not take that money and update the pro shop? Originally, the pro shop, for those of you that weren't here, was a fitness center, and then after that, it became the table tennis center, and then finally the pro shop.
Okay, thank you, got about 15
I
seconds.
just want to go, 2 minutes is too many.
Hank Walker, I know. Okay, thank you, Hank. He's in unit 46, but I don't know his lot number.
My name is Don Sanders. I'm in unit 48, I think I'm lot 31. My career was in project management and specifically looking at subcontractors. And when I looked at what you just presented, I'm wondering, we always sat down with number one and the number two, the bidders. And we did a comprehensive review of their bids. And I'm seeing 25% difference between bid one and bid two. 5.7 to 7.5 or something like that. But I'm wondering, as part of your process, do you sit down with each of the subcontractors and go over their bids, their assumptions? I know that excavation has a lot of concealed conditions. There are a lot of things that whenever you're taking a look at comparing bids, I think that you would find that between bid one and bid two, the assumptions, when you're doing unit pricing, the assumptions that contractors make, there would probably be something glaring if you sat them down and went over their whole bid with them. When you do a pre-construction meeting with them, that should also become part of your contract. That you've gone over their scope of work, they've identified the scope, you've done everything so that there's not a hole in the bid, because what happens with subcontractors is they end up saying, well, I didn't figure that out, or I didn't have that included. I was wondering, did you do that?
I'm going to let our two consultants who ran the bidding process comment on that.
Yes, we did do it. And on top of that, in the AIA documents and the contract, all the documents, all the specs, both Marvin's and my drawings, all that becomes a part of their contract. So they're all tied to those units, sizes, square footages, the whole thing. So all that's in.
So where did you see $2 million difference then whenever you reviewed these? That's a sizable number in a project of this size. Where did you see the $2 million difference? There's got to be something pretty big there.
Sure. Have you ever bought a Ferrari or a Chevy?
Well, I think the Ferrari was $11 million.
It was.
Okay, the Ferrari was $11 million, but as long as you've done that.
We've done it. It's you know, it's kind of interesting because you look at one person's bids and they'll have a number, to your point, they'll have a number in shaping, and they may have $150,000 in shaping or $300,000 in shaping. The next guy might have a number of $700,000. He just thinks it costs more, but that's where maybe more his profit is placed. When you get down to drainage, the one contractor may have a drainage install price of $7 a linear foot. The other one might have $11 a linear foot. So it's all a matter with unit costs. You know, if you've done this, is that some guys just like their work more than others. They think their value is higher than the next guy down the street. I can tell you the contractor that's the low bid has done a lot of very high quality golf courses. Whisper Rock up in Scottsdale, both courses there, Desert Mountain, the par 3 course they just built last year or the year before. Post and Butte, Wickenburg Ranch, SaddleBrooke Ranch, they built that. So it's not a contractor that's Bob's Plumbing and Landscape from down the street. I mean, they've all been vetted, they're highly qualified individuals.
Yeah, no, I'm not suggesting that they weren't qualified. I'm just, that your process, and I guess since this community is spending $5, $6 million, that process, it's interesting to me that you did that process. And then I guess I would just throw another comment out is with regards to the piping, not uncommon for ownership to make large pre-purchases. I worked in industrial piping, and it was not uncommon for us to pre-purchase, like, as a suggestion to save money, to pre-purchase all the HDPE piping, which I believe is the correct.
Okay, thank you, we appreciate your comments. Okay, not seeing any more comments. Thank you all for attending today.
One question. Do we know where the HDPE pipe is coming from?
China, I'm sure.
Pardon?
So there's a lot of different manufacturers that make the HDPE. The biggest supplier is here in Tucson. ISCO is what it's called. So they right now are supplying 4 or 5 of my projects.
Are they a manufacturer or are they just a?
They're just a supplier. They're not they don't manufacture. There's
Right.
a few big ones that supply it. I think somewhere like in New Orleans is an area where they actually make the pipe.
Yes, Therese, Art Kozak from Unit 29, Lot 26. The question I have is, we have done it in the past, why not reverse the courses as we did in 2014 so that the current 18 becomes 9, the current 1 becomes 10. So that means that you would reduce the traffic to the parking lot from 9 to 18, the current 9 to 10. Secondly, it would allow you to get the bar and grill back up as a full-service 3-meal-a-day restaurant. And the ski, which really doesn't have a full-service kitchen, and people have to stand in line to get in, you could actually convert that into a moneymaker as an activity center very similar to HOA 1. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just can't let this cart path thing.
Okay, your name, like you.
Oh, I'm sorry, John Stevenson, Unit 49, 153. This is $193,000. I just can't see why we can't come off of 9, go out to the street, stripe it off, put some little barriers, little reflectors down there, stop signs if necessary, and make it one way only to the pro shop.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think we're done. Thank you all.